the massive electric energy that existed last year was not going to last.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maya Rose, and you are listening to another episode of Thorn and Thistle, the podcast where I'm just trying my best. Welcome back. And if you are new, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here on this marvelous day. Today's episode, we are interviewing Raehann Bryce-Davis, who is a wonderful mezzo-soprano in the operatic world and also a member of the Leadership Council of the Black Opera Alliance. And we're going to be talking all about accountability and following up with all of the promises of solidarity and allyship of organizations and opera companies from 2020, where everybody was really fired up about Black Lives Matter. And we're gonna come back in 2021 and see how much of that has actually been acted on, what mishaps, what missteps have we seen, and what do we want to see going forward into the future. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and we're just gonna get straight into it. Take it away, Maya, from the past.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me for the second part of the episode. I am joined by a brilliant mezzo-soprano, Raehann Bryce-Davis. She is hailed by the New York Times as a striking mezzo-soprano. She has a number of notable oratorio and opera roles. She's also performed at LA Opera, Dallas Opera, and a number of other places. She's also a member of the Black Opera Alliance Leadership Council. Raehann Bryce-Davis, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here to chat with all of you.
We are extremely excited to have you here today. It's really more of an episode on, looking back on the last year, all the promises that we heard, all the promises that were made, all the steps that we sort of made to create a more equitable industry within the opera industry. And what are we seeing now in 2021, a year separated from all of that? And I just want to know, how was your experience over the last year? Just checking in with you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really grateful to be alive. To pay bills is a huge thing. To have work coming up is.
You've been singing?
I've been singing. I just finished a workshop in Colorado, and I'm prepping for my Azucena debut at Glimmerglass coming up in a few weeks.
It's amazing. I still regularly go back and listen to your video to The Afflicted. Not only is it like a beautiful visual concept, but it also is just beautiful singing, and it's just amazing. I'm so glad that the industry has your voice attached to it.
Thank you.
Have you been particularly busy, or is it a slower sort of year? Honestly, because we've spoken before about how you've sort of entered into the professional space of the opera industry. How has that been for you?
Everything right before the pandemic was getting really intense and exciting. And then of course the pandemic was silence. Now it's getting back into being a bit crazy, because before that, all of my professional career was in Europe. So
really?
This is now a coming home season of having lots of gigs here, which is really exciting.
I personally am a big fan. So thank you so much for gracing the podcast today.
Oh, thank you, my dear.
How did you get involved with the Black Opera Alliance? I'm particularly curious. The Black Opera Alliance is a community-led, sort of community-centered nonprofit that was established in June of 2020, sort of in response to just the atrocities that we were seeing in the moment and the sort of high intensity sort of emotions we were all experiencing. The Black community of the opera industry sort of came together and said, we need to start making a voice for ourselves and exposing the sort of racism that's been plaguing our industry for the entirety of its existence, and especially since it started including people of color. How did you come to become a part of such an organization and become part of the Leadership Council?
I was there from day one, from day -1.
Not -1.
It all started as a big conversation we called the cookout. It was just supposed to be a few people getting together to tell some of our leading singers, they wanted feedback on, they were being asked to do all these panels essentially. And so they were like, you know what, let's ask the community what it is that they want us to be talking about. And so that's what it started as. And then all of a sudden there were 400 people trying to be like, and this, and this.
Right.
It was beautiful. It was chaotic. And somehow through a team of people that I'm really grateful to be able to collaborate with, have been able to synthesize this huge energy and this huge power into what is the organization that is today the Black Opera Alliance. One of the earliest things that we had was filtering down what was this open letter to the industry, the pledge. Right. I was there knee deep in all the conversations, trying to write down what everybody's thoughts were and making them all make sense. And together we all made this beautiful document that we released into the industry. So that was my initial contribution. And essentially all the people that were the loudest on the wall became the leadership council, because everybody was like, anybody else want to do anything? Anybody? No? Okay.
No,
we're doing
us?
this.
Just us? Okay.
We're doing this.
But that's truly amazing initiative to be taking, because honestly, at that particular moment in time, so many of us in the industry and just so many Black people across America in general and across the world, we're just feeling so drained. Having the Black Opera Alliance as sort of now a year later, still seeing the organization moving forward and progressing and reaching new goals and setting new challenges and new sights on progress. It is really amazing. And I think it's just such a necessary space that we needed in the industry and in the Black community within the greater opera industry, not just like an organization that leads conversation and action, but also just as a space for other Black artists to sort of congregate and to be able to have that space to say, hey, I feel this way. I've been through the same thing. Like, it has a power of bringing us together in a way that I don't think we've ever seen.
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. Just in general, I think one of the beauties of it is that whether you're active in the space, whether you are not even in the space, no matter if you are against this space and you are Black, the Black Opera Alliance is for everyone.
Right.
And the work that we do benefits everyone. Whether you're tired, like you were saying, which there are lots of time this year that I have been tired, and I've been able to just like tag in a teammate who runs in and is like, all right, I got this. And then when they get tired, they're like, all right. And I'm like, all right. So it's just a beautiful community where, as you were saying, that is a safe space to have these conversations that we've been wrestling with privately. We're very often predominantly in these white spaces. And so it's just like a relief to come together with people who know exactly what you're saying, who are living the same kind of struggle that you are living without having to explain necessarily exactly.
You don't have to give that extra context that you right. When you're speaking to people who don't have that experience.
Exactly.
Something that is pretty unique about Black Opera Alliance is this idea of a leadership council and not necessarily a hierarchical structure to the leadership. It's taking the community-led centeredness of it all, which, you know, the Black Opera Alliance reaches out regularly to the larger community for their opinions and their sort of feedback, but also saying that even in a sense of leadership, this is still a community effort. This is not some one person. There is no Martin Luther King. There's just us as a community. We're making decisions and we want everybody to be included. And I think that shows in creating a leadership council. Would you agree?
I agree 1000%. And we're now coming to a place where, a year is finished and the leadership council terms will soon be wrapping up. And I'm very interested to see what the second chapter is of the Black Opera Alliance, where the community thinks we should be going.
Something that is really unique and necessary is that within the Black Opera Alliance, like groups and space, like we as a Black community can have conversations that the nuance of those conversations get stripped away when we include people outside of the community. And by that, I mean, like, if somebody is saying, well, I think we should do this, or I think we should care about this, we're able to have those conversations come to sort of a more unified front and present that as information that makes our objectives a little bit more clear, because I think something that is a persistent problem in the DEI, or the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, is this sort of feeling where like not everybody has a different idea of how to do things, or what is bad, or what is good, or what is gray. We had those arguments privately, and now we are talking, like now we are bringing our unified ideas to the table in a way that makes it, I think, a little bit easier for action to sort of actually be moved forward.
I wouldn't necessarily say that everything that we do is unified. People still maintain different ideas about how some things should be done.
Right.
And even after the conversation is had, the unifying stance that we take is what the majority says, which doesn't mean that, you know, everybody's on the same page at the end, but it is a democratic process.
What is it like when people, like when you do have those moments where people might be butting heads on how to move forward?
We try to listen as much as we can. We have weekly meetings as a leadership council, and we have these arguments and we hash them out. In the early days, our meetings could be like 6 hours long.
You got lunch in the middle or something.
You do. You just turn off your camera for a minute.
You're like, hold on, I gotta go take a 30-minute.
Equity. And you back all up in it. So there are a lot of really, really opinionated people within the leadership council. We represent a wide range of ideas.
And you all were voted for. There was an election process. I am also pretty interested to see like how things change going forward. Really, the question sort of overarching this whole conversation is essentially, how do we keep the momentum going? Because what we saw in June last year, of June 2020, was this electric response to really such a horrible tragedy, but a tragedy that has continued to happen on multiple occasions since then. I think something that was particularly special about 2020 that everybody sort of agrees on is that it gave us all a moment of pause where we were forced to sort of sit with sort of situations. What are your impressions of like the people around you and like the energy around you? Do you think that people are still in a similar mindset that they were in 2020? Like, how do you think things have gone since then?
We've known from day one that the massive electric energy that existed last year was not going to last. We as a culture are too easily distracted for us to stay equally fired up about one thing. For exactly this reason, so much of our work has been geared towards creating structures that will last through people's swings of emotion.
Yeah, and I think that social media has made it really easy to like get all that emotion, but also really easy to forget about it because everybody's sort of like moving on to the next thing. So like you said, it's a culture. What BOA has done is really interesting. So I'm gonna go through the pledge, a sort of manifesto sent out to opera companies across the US. And it is a list of 8 sort of action items that US opera companies can enact that people can focus on when they're going into the realm of DEI. Number 1, hire Black artists. Number 2, hire Black administrators. Number 3, program and prioritize Black works and works by Black composers. Number 4, hire Black production staff and people throughout the organization. Number 5, hire makeup, hair, lighting, and visual teams that understand how to set up Black artists for the stage in a way that is effective and also appropriate. Number 6, get used to the practice of comparing wages and hiring practices of various people of different races and ethnicities throughout the organization so that pay and hiring is equitable. Review the board members of your organization. And number 8 is to create within your code of conduct for your organization a contractual commitment to anti-racism that board members would then sign.
I think the last 6 through 8 really emphasize having a structure, as I was talking about the structure of accountability, hiring a third party DEI specialist that will ensure that this work continues.
Right.
We'll be able to fill in some of the nuances in this number 8, in terms of the hiring practices of the board, and hiring practices for future admin, etc. Part of our grant from the Sphinx Venture Fund is to provide a budget if some of the smaller opera companies are not able to afford a third-party DEI consultant. Right. VOA can supplement that cost.
I watched through the original, like the first roundtable conversation that was had. It's on YouTube with the Black Opera Alliance YouTube channel. It is the Equity Roundtable.
Let's not get it twisted. Inclusion is about power.
It was a conversation with industry leaders, but also people who are part of smaller opera organizations, people who had questions and concerns about the document, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists, and also Black Opera Alliance representative, Dr. Raehann was moderating that conversation. Something that was particularly interesting out of that conversation, I imagine that seeing such a list of demands from a grassroots organization that just started for some of these opera companies was both intimidating and also like, what is this? How do we go about like addressing this in a way that is effective and also looks good? Something that was brought up multiple times by Dr. Raehann was working with VOA to get the document to a place for your organization that you can sign. What can be done now? Get those things done. A significant amount of companies responded in kind. Did you think that it was going to get as much traction as it ended up doing?
I don't know what my expectations were. I was just hoping for the best. At the time, so many companies were releasing these statements of how they were in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and how, they had this emphasis. Our open letter was meant to be in conjunction with these statements. They should be on the same page. If you have this commitment to creating an inclusive atmosphere, therefore you want to know how to better do so.
Right. Like, the real question underneath all of it is, okay, and we see people say, oh, we stand with you.
Right.
Stand with you. And like, then next thing you know, they forgot, or they don't care, or they're not checking the people around them.
And I think we saw that most clearly recently with Central City Opera, the statement that they released in June 2020 about, having all these priorities to create a diverse environment and everything. And then you looked the next year at their list of young artists.
That was hilarious. They released a statement last year, like everybody else, about wanting to stand with Black artists and wanting to do better going into the future. Yet when they released their roster of both young artists and also apprentice level artists, which are the professional level artists, everyone on the roster was white presenting. I couldn't tell if anybody was not white. Who knows? Somebody might have a little bit of something going on. And then also this came like right after, like maybe a day or two after they had put out something about standing with Black people and like doing more Black work, which made it comical almost to me, because I saw that and I was like, who is running this? Like, is nobody? And we see that a lot, but that I think is the biggest example in the industry so far.
Yeah. And in general, it's not just this year. Looking back at all of their group photos from the last few years, I think I skimmed back to like 2017. The pictures all look very similar with a very occasional little sprinkling of some brown.
Why do you think that is, before I jump in with why I think it is?
I mean, this is the structure that has been created. I would not say that it is anything specific to Central City. I think it takes some effort to create an inclusive environment and to have equitable practices. Those are not things that just happen.
Right.
There takes some effort. Perhaps you have auditions and nobody that specifically is what you need is at those auditions. It is therefore your responsibility as an organization to go out and perhaps do non-standard research and outreach to find these people that would create an equitable environment. And I don't think that a lot of organizations even thought of that as a possibility, that they're responsible for creating the atmosphere that they want to see. There are so many barriers to equity. Some of them are displayed in this letter, and we haven't even talked about the financial barriers that are so a part of young Black artists' lives. If you can be the greatest soprano to ever open her mouth living in Wyoming, and if you don't have money to get to New York, no one will ever hear you. Now it becomes a climate where it is your responsibility to expand your network, which is I'm sure predominantly white. It is now your responsibility to go and make new connections, perhaps with HBCUs, perhaps with universities that have Black artists that weren't able to afford, to trying new things to tap into Black artists who haven't been able to get into this space.
It is a systemic issue.
Correct.
Whatever we've been doing is not going to create that atmosphere. So just continuing along with that, like Central clearly has done, is obviously not an effective strategy of creating these inclusive spaces. On the Equity Roundtable in September last year, a lot of the concerns and questions from the audience were, what if we don't have a diverse community? Just go out and find some people. Yeah, they exist.
Yeah. And your reaction to it was saying, I can do that. There are other people's reaction who will be, I want to give to that. I want to donate towards that. So it's also dollars that companies are forfeiting by maintaining the status quo of what opera has predominantly looked like since its inception. It's very short-sighted of companies to keep things as they are when our world is changing so drastically. 10 years down the road, some of these millionaire donors are not going to be there anymore. And who will you have if you haven't dug into your community and really become a part of it and become part of the cultural essential makeup of what your community enjoys and is inspired by?
The running joke in the opera industry is that opera is dying. Within our own spaces and also just outside of it, and it's this concept that it's like, is it really, or is there just no effort being made to expand to greater audiences and move along with the times? There are so many people who would be interested, and you see this with people on TikTok who sing opera,
right?
And people are like, oh my God, this is amazing, I didn't know this. People just don't know.
No. The competitions where they hear terrible opera singers and they're weeping like, who's this almost
the most amazing singer I've ever heard, and you're like, I can do you one better. It's an untapped market that we see that they know exists whenever someone programs Porgy and Bess. Because that is a money maker, and people know that they can use Blackness as a commodity, but it's not. They don't seem to want to invest in Black people. People want to see us. People want to see Black people on stage.
I will say that there are a lot of companies that are really trying to do better. Are they nailing it in every area? Absolutely not. This Trovatore that I'm doing in Glimmerglass, it's Latanya Moore is Leonora. I'm singing Azucena. Eric Owens is singing Ferrando. Then this one that I'm doing in LA next, originally Angel Blue was singing Leonora. I was singing Azucena. Morris Robinson is also in the cast. So some companies are really embracing this diversity and not just doing the continual, we have one Black person in the cast, but really gathering singers to make a statement on stage. Are they all nailing it behind the scenes? Are there boards, set up? Is their admin completely inclusive? Those are different conversations.
I wish that people would see the value of having a diverse stage, or a stage that represents the world in which we live a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I hope next time we have this conversation, I have more than 2 examples of places. But I will say that I think we are in a stronger place than where we were in 2020.
Yeah.
For example, there is a work that is in production that is predominantly Black cast, but it's being created by 2 white men. In 2020 and before, that would not even be in question.
Yeah.
You know, there would be no anxiety around that.
Yeah.
But knowing that we're in 2021, the conversation around that piece is so much more robust, and the realization that consequences could be quite dire to that, you know. So,
Yeah.
So I think the culture has changed, because I don't think that there would be any concern before now.
Yeah, more people feel, I think, the eyes of the greater community looking at them, and as they should. I really wish that it was some sort of intrinsically motivated ideal for true equity and just we love each other, but that's just not the case. Putting pressure on these companies with like, okay, we are going to like something that Black Opera Alliance has done on social media, where it's just like highlighting in red, San Antonio Opera does not want to refuse to sign the pledge.
And really, it's just like there's a clarity and an openness and a transparency, yes, that is now the culture, which is what Black Opera Alliance is striving to create. For example, with Opera San Antonio, it was never trying to make an example of. We reached out to have communication with that opera company and still would love to be in communication with that opera company. Do we want to create animosity between companies or between ourselves and companies? Absolutely not. We would love to just have everywhere be inclusive and wonderful and equitable. Like, the animosity is absolutely not what we're against. But we made a promise to release our pledge and to tell our followers and supporters what the results of that were. And that's the phase where we are right now.
With that collaboration with TRG, or the real
correct
the results
correct
group for the arts. The results group for the arts and BOA are doing a collaboration, creating a sort of report, a data report of like the updates on the pledge since the update of March 10th, 2021. So this last March, 44% of the US opera companies that received the pledge had signed, 33% were in progress or were in talks to sign, or whatever the case may be, and then 19% had not yet responded, and 1 had declined, which was Opera San Antonio. Has that changed at all? Are we seeing any new updates coming for that?
We are every week or so we have some new signatories from these yellows turning to greens. And we have some people who had previously not responded. We have conversations coming up in the next few weeks. So the numbers are continually changing, and we are striving towards 100%, because that is what is good for everyone. That is what is good for opera. Companies have been sent a survey, essentially tracking the 8 points of the pledge and how they have responded to it for the last 3 years, I believe.
And like monitorable or recordable ways.
Right. So therefore, we know where we're starting from, so that in the future years, we can see the growth in data of...
So majorly important on a multitude of levels. Not only can you track the growth over time, but you can also see what areas need to be improved upon, or what maybe things that might need to be clarified. You can also see sort of like what is effective. It's just an amazing thing. And also it gives a visual sort of for people who are out in the world, like what's going on. It gives that transparency that you
Exactly. And so I think it's a gift to our communities, to our industry. And a lot of companies are looking at it as a gift to themselves. You know, they don't have to hire somebody necessarily to do this. That's what TRG Arts in communication with the BOA research team is accomplishing.
And just sort of wrapping all of this up in a cute little bow. You guys are very close to reaching what is your $10,000 goal fundraiser, if you haven't already by now. Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, last time I had checked in, you guys were like 98% of the way there. So I was kind of assuming that you had reached it by now. $10,000 to support Black artists. In what ways is this fund going to support the community?
We had an initiative for Black artists to be able to write in and request equipment. And going forward into the 2021 season, I believe now that places are opening up more, it will be studio time rather than just, you know, the equipment, since now that will be the new standard. We've been providing financial seminars for artists, everywhere from investments, home ownership.
You've mentioned this and we've touched on it, but this is definitely an intersectional conversation where there are layers of class and socioeconomic status. The difference of a good recording or quality recording equipment for an artist is massive.
Going forward, we're going to implement things like a diction class. We put out a poll in the membership of what language people felt like they really needed to strengthen. It seems like French has very massively won. So we're just trying to see where the needs are in the community and fill them in any way that we can.
Continuing to reach back out and have that dialogue with the community to see what people are asking for.
As you were saying, so many of these barriers are financial.
Yeah.
If you've been able to afford a French tutor since the age of 10, you know, that's a financial asset that you have. And if you have not been able to, that's an equitable barrier. And our goal is always to break down these barriers.
For your sort of journey through the industry and also as a member of BOA, what kind of goals personally would you say that you might have? Connecting
back to something we kind of briefly mentioned in the Central City conversation was one of the young ladies spoke up and said, actually, I'm Asian, and it's only that I'm white passing in that picture. And so this whole conversation of white passing is one that we've never really had as an industry, and colorism. And I think that's the next step. We've started having conversations with Opera America, with this survey that we just created. Rather than allowing all artists to self-identify their race, it provides space for the organization to fill in the race themselves.
Interesting.
Because we know that race is a social construct, and if that company looked at that young lady and said, that's a white soprano or mezzo, when they hired her, is that the same as them purposely hiring an Asian young woman? Latina women in opera have been having very loudly, because within the Latinx community, you have Black Afro-Latinos, you have white people that are just from Latin American countries, South American or Central American, but are in fact by race white or white passing. And then you have indigenous people. So within that classification, there's a whole facet of races.
Right.
You know, and so by somebody checking in a box that they are Latinx, does that mean that there is actually diversity within the company? So this conversation is huge and nuanced, and I can't even present it to the intellectual prowess that you will hear coming up, because I think Opera America is taking it on, and it's a big conversation that we're going to have between BOA and some other experts within the field
That's awesome.
of what this looks like. My next big goal and project for BOA to really empower companies who may feel uncomfortable in filling out the survey to really jump into what is uncomfortable and what is not. You know, what you think is the most woke thing is like, well, I'm blah, blah. It's like, but you don't look like it, baby. No matter how you self-identify.
I mean, that's a conversation that, like, within the Black community, we have on a regular basis, the color conversation. This podcast is all about having these intersectional nuance, giving the conversation nuance. Like, you or I are not the definitive spokespeople for this conversation. There are much smarter, much more experienced and expert people in this field than me to have this conversation. But I do think it's a conversation that's worth exploring.
I'm so excited about having an organization out there that if I ever am in a tricky situation myself and I don't have the freedom to, you know, like write the general director, like, I'm very upset about this, you know, and risk never being hired back at that company, knowing that there's an organization that always has my back.
Right.
To be able to speak in general.
I think that within our community, especially within like the classical music industry, there is a sort of culture of just like keeping things to yourself because you're afraid that if you start speaking up, the community is small, like people talk, and that could be a really damaging thing to your career. So it is so important that there is somebody standing up for you, somebody in your corner that's a little bit bigger than you, a little bit more than you, that can be that spokesperson on your behalf. 10 years from now, like, how are we going to be looking back on the summer of 2020? It's weird because it feels like now that we're moving out of it and things are opening up, like, it feels like it was a fever dream. But if you remember, like, June last year, people were in the streets. Looking back on just that in isolation is one thing, but being able to see it over time is going to really be the defining, like, what did we do and how did it affect the future? And I'm really excited to see those changes. I think I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, and I'm really excited to see what the future brings for all of us.
I want to see a place where Black and brown people feel at home in opera, on stage, behind the stage, in the boardrooms, in the audience, as staff members.
Absolutely.
I want to see an opera field that tells relevant stories that people want to hear and tells them with creativity and that people feel inspired.
Tell us where the people can find you.
You can find me on Instagram, my name, Raehann Bryce-Davis, on Facebook, Raehann Bryce-Davis. My website is raehann.com. Find a lawn chair at Glimmerglass. Come to LA, come to Germany, come to Belgium, wherever you want to come.
Come to wherever Raehann is. Fly out, because you're gonna want to hear it, okay? That is the official report.
That was a great conversation, wasn't it? I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to connect, because we have been back and forth seeing each other, kind of revolving around each other on social media for so long. I hope that you guys learned something new, or maybe expanded on some conversations that you might be having within your communities, or maybe had an opportunity to think critically about some biases that you might hold, or what you can be doing personally within your own communities to further this idea and this reality of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our spaces, especially our creative and artistic spaces. You can follow the podcast and me on Maya on Twitter and Instagram. That's MY_OH_MYAH on Instagram and on Twitter. Find the podcast on thornandthistlepod.com. You know what it is. You're already here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Bye.